Views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of Blue Ridge PBS, the Virginia Department of Education, or the Virginia Society for Technology and Education.
Whenever new and disruptive technology appears, educators are often leery of adopting it at first, and the same is true with artificial intelligence, or AI. In this episode of ActiVAtED Learning, we'll talk to Rachelle Dene Poth, an instructional technologist, world language teacher, and attorney who provides some ways that teachers and students can begin to dip their toes into AI to explore its possibilities and limitations. So thanks for joining me on this edition of ActiVAtED Learning.
Blue Ridge PBS, in partnership with the Virginia Department of Education and in collaboration with VSTE, the Virginia Society for Technology and Education, is talking to leading educators about what gets them energized and how technology is being used to inspire student engagement. This is ActiVAtED Learning.
There's so much that you have to do, like all those clerical tasks that can be automated, save time, just to get a quick check on students so that you're not sitting there grading when they're not going to look at the feedback. When it comes to using some of those tools, it's like I always think about what are the things that take up the most time for you that don't really necessarily need the human in it as much.
Rachelle, I'm so glad that you're agreeing to take some time. You've got a really packed schedule today at the Tech Splash here in Abingdon. We are recording this in the summertime, for those of you who wonder when we record things. And it's one of those days in the middle of the heat of the summer when, I don't know, over 100 teachers are here to get excited about technology. So I'm very excited to have Rachelle Dene Poth, and ISTE certified educator, consultant, author, attorney, all these things that you do. And much like you do in your podcast, which is Thrive in EDU, we'll talk about that a couple times. I always like to also start, because some people are watching this and they don't have any idea who either one of us is. So tell me about how you became a teacher.
I went to Penn State and I took a lot of different courses. I took French in high school and really enjoyed it. I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do when I went to college. So I was enrolled in the School of Liberal Arts, and I tell this story all the time. I remember them calling me in the beginning of my junior year, telling me that I needed to declare a major. And I was very confused because I thought I had declared a major. I thought it was liberal arts. And they said, no, that's actually the school. Like, you need a specific major. And I come from I loved playing school when I was a kid. For whatever reason, and never thought about being a teacher. I have a lot of people in my family who worked in education. And so I said to the counselor that day, I said, well, what am I doing okay in? And she gave me some ideas, and she said, why don't you explore education? And I said, you mean be a teacher? And she said, yeah. And so I gave it a shot. I did the student teaching, and I thought I'll try this for, 5 or 10 years or so. And let's just say I've been in education longer than 5 or 10 years or so. But yeah.
As have I. And, I think it's important to remember that kids, we talk about career prep and all this stuff. I decided on my major, which was communications, because I went to freshman registration back when you had to fill it out on an index card and turn it in. And there was nobody at the line. There was nobody in line at the table for communications. And I said, is that like working in radio and stuff? She's like, yeah, so sign me up for that. So we're all, it's funny how things lead us to different places. I listened to a bunch of episodes of your podcast, and I read a bunch of your writing in preparation for this interview. But one thing I didn't hear, at least in the ones I listened to, was tell me about your school. Where is it? And also how, for those, we got a little studio audience here, and everybody's always curious, well, yes, you talk about all these great things, but you must work in a school that has all the resources and everything imaginable. So tell me about your school, the division, the kind of kids you teach.
It's a small public school, K through 12, 2 elementaries, about probably 15 minutes from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I think graduating class size recently was 50. So I've been there for a very long time. And when I started, I was teaching French and Spanish. And then there were 3 language teachers, and then went down to 2. So I teach all Spanish classes and a STEAM technology course. But I'm lucky to be there. It's a very nice school. They have a lot of resources. And the reason I got into the technology is not because I was we won't say what decade, technology kid years ago, but we got a grant to change our library into makerspace. And so when that happened, my principal called me in and said, well, with you teaching the languages like the arts, you're going to teach hummingbirds. And that's a longer story, but I was very confused. And so I Googled it, figured out it was not the things that you see outside in the summer because I had no training.
But the little robot, right? Yes.
And so I did that for 2 years, was not very good at it. And then they moved that to the younger grades. And so now what I teach is basically AI and all of those different emerging technologies that we see. So as far as resources, a lot of the things I get from a local cohort that will lend things. Also, some companies, they want you to try it out. So there's a lot of free trials, especially from Pittsburgh. Some great products come from there as well. And I'm not afraid to buy things that I think will be valuable for my students either.
And just try them out.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And, so it's a small school, and the folks out here in far southwest Virginia where we're recording this can relate to that, right? We have a lot of small schools and schools that used to be small that have now been combined into big schools. So good to know that you're just a normal teacher, despite all of your activities and accolades. One more question about your past. Is there a big memory of a teacher or an activity that either inspired you to maybe do better when you were a student? What kind of student were you? And do you have a shout out for maybe a teacher, good or bad?
I do. I mean, there are several, and I've written about a couple of those experiences because even in elementary school, and this is not the one that came to mind first when you asked, but in elementary school, I had a teacher that was just really not very kind and just said unkind things. And it's still to this day, I remember how that made me feel. So I'm always mindful of my words. But my real answer to your question, I was just telling somebody about an hour ago, actually, before we were talking here now, and it was a law school professor. Because I had been teaching at my school for, I think, 4 years and decided to go to law school, applied to law school, didn't know if I would get accepted, didn't tell anybody I was applying, took the test, got the scores, had no idea what they meant, let it go for 3 years, and then finally decided to apply again. And taught full time and then went to law school 4 years, 4 nights a week. So I was living in schools, but it was, I think, my second year I had a teacher, Professor Ankoviak, that I say to this day, had it not been for him in law school, I would not be in the classroom, because that opened my eyes to what it's like to really struggle when you've done everything you can and you don't know the answer, or you're afraid to make a mistake, but also the importance of relationships and mentoring. Because I remember, he taught many classes and he was writing books and doing all these things. And I set up a meeting with him and I walked into his office and there's books and he's working. And I was like, okay, Rachelle, think about just what's the specific question or questions you have? Just take 5 minutes of his time. And I knocked on the door and I said, hi, I'm just going to take 5 minutes of your time. And he said, you can have all the time you want. And I said, no, you're so busy. You have all these things going on. And he said, what stuff? And he moved everything aside. He said, have a seat. And I was like, wow, what a difference.
What would one of your teachers from elementary school or high school think if they walked into your classroom today, do you think?
Gosh. Well, if it were my French teacher, one of the French teachers, I think she'd be very proud at all the things of the student work and art and stuff that I have displayed in my room, just because she had us do all kinds of hands-on projects. And I love technology, but I also love seeing what students create. And I think she would be like, wow, she's using some of my ideas from, last century when I was teaching the language. Some things haven't changed. And then I think my other teacher would probably wonder why I wasn't grading in red ink.
You're still teaching Spanish.
Right.
What do you think it does for you as a teacher who's teaching the STEAM courses to also still have a regular curriculum that is more traditional? What does it do for you in terms of the way you think about using technology in your classroom?
I think about what am I doing in my technology class and why I'm doing it and how could that be relevant to my Spanish classes. And actually about 6 or 7 years ago now is when I was put to the test, because some of my students in my Spanish class said, why don't we get to do the cool AR, VR stuff? And I just went, like that. Like I had nothing to say, and I usually have something
You were
to
still
say.
teaching Spanish the way that I probably learned Spanish in high school, or, more than that, but yeah.
Technology, the game-based learning tools, interactive lesson tools like Nearpod, and that part I was using a little bit of VR, but I wasn't having them create anything like that. And I just had never thought about it because I used to say, I'm just, with like the air quotes, a Spanish teacher. I can't do any of those other things because it doesn't fit into, the box of like teaching Spanish. So now that I know better because those kids pushed me and I saw the benefits, now I do more. I try to do more because I think that they need the opportunities because they're not all necessarily getting those opportunities to explore those technologies, and they definitely need to. We want our students to be comfortable with taking risks and making mistakes and learning from that. And so then we have to model that. And I never used to do that. Like I would be so embarrassed if I made a mistake, like, oh no, or I didn't know the answer to something. And then over the years with, every passing year, I realized like the kids, again, going back to law school experience where the worst but probably best experience I had was in my contract law class. 3 hours was the course. 2 hours and 51 minutes of the one night was me trying to answer the professor's questions because the Socratic method. And he's in the front of the room, facing the board, head up, red face, frustrated with me. And it wasn't that I wasn't prepared. I was super prepared. But I just didn't know like how to answer him. And that was so uncomfortable. And I thought for sure when that class ended, I was done. He's like, well, next week we'll pick up with Poth and maybe she'll have the answer. I was like, oh my goodness, like this is very uncomfortable. But that's another thing that I learned from law school is like how to share that with students and say, you know what, like I made up this activity. I don't know if it's going to work, or we're going to try this today. It might not go well, and then own it. And then you have fun learning together.
This is ActiVATED Learning.
We think that our students and our children right now know how to navigate technology because it's everywhere.
Because we see them in Walmart in the grocery cart, with their iPad in front.
We have the iPad kids, but when you want them to use them for a certain purpose, it has to be taught. And so it all came down to teaching our students how to use those tools in a meaningful way.
Subscribe to the podcast on Amazon Music, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Blue Ridge PBS Echo TV.
Okay, let's shift a little bit to what you have learned. You've been studying AI for many years now. You're one of the earliest to start saying this is going to show up in my classroom. In your keynote, you talked about some statistics that kind of shocked you in terms of where teachers are right now in being taught about AI and using it. And can you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so it has shifted now, luckily, in the last couple of months, especially with more states setting things up for their teachers or conferences. But as of earlier this year, that it was like 87% of the teachers had not had any training related to AI. And in my own sessions that I've done, it was pretty close to that. In some cases, it was like 98%, 99%.
And those are often in your audiences full of people who are using technology,
exactly.
Right?
And that's what's surprising. Even with things like using ChatGPT or one of the other large language models, the percentages were pretty high a year and a half out. So I found those to be surprising. But the numbers are coming down from what they were initially because I think people are seeing the benefits of using them for something and just getting started. So we'll see.
And I know you have a lot of thoughts on this. Your latest book is about AI. You're always looking for that kind of, gateway drug for educators to get into something, right? So when you think about the easiest things that teachers can use, either maybe for themselves because you want to try it yourself before you roll it out to kids, what are some of your your hit list of things like, if you're scared of it or you haven't used it yet, try these 2 things?
Oh boy, 2. I'm glad you didn't say what. No.
Sure, I could do 12 and you could do it.
I always talk around it and I find a way to make it 1, but it's a very robust one. I mean, aside from the ChatGPT, we'll just pretend that ChatGPT is one that everybody's going to try. But if I were to pick 2, one that I really like is called EduAid. And that's
EduAid. Spell EduAid for us here.
EduAide. And then it's EduAid AI. And the reason I like that is because it has been created by 2 educators both originally from Pittsburgh, both named Thomas, both still in the classroom. One at the elementary level, one I believe at the middle school, and they have over 120 resources, and it does. And I'll be showing it later in my session. And I always talk about them because that authenticity, and they know what teachers need, and they have so much built within. So that's the one, and then the other one is Quizzes AI, and that's QUIZIZZ.
Thank you for spelling that, because I don't think our listeners would have known that.
Well, there's so many that start with quiz, and if you use voice to text, you get the other spelling of quizzes, like you're giving a quiz. But they have been around. I talked to them, their founders, when they were still in the university in India, like in 2015. And last August, they added AI enhanced features, so you can do a lot of different things. And in April, they brought out accommodation profiles. So like if you have students that need extra time, less options, there's all of these different accommodations for each student, and then none of the other students know it. But the AI feature of it too, they're pretty awesome. So I'm going to go with those two.
Are those things that have to be purchased, or is there a free version of them?
I think there is a free, and they have different licensing for individual educators, school, district. I must be on the school. And so, but it's awesome how you can set it up for each student. And then if students have similar accommodations, they put them into groups. And then when you launch the game, and none of the kids know they have anything different, they're just each getting what they need.
Right. That ability to customize. I think accommodations, when I was in the classroom, that took so much of my time, and especially because I was teaching in a virtual environment for the last 10, 15 years I was doing it. How does AI, this is a big question, how does AI make a teacher's job, not the teaching part of it necessarily, but how does it make a teacher's job easier when it comes to those accommodations? I'm thinking language and other things.
Well, if you're using ChatGPT, of course, or any of the other large language models, you can ask it, I'm teaching a group of third grade students, or give it a role. You are a third grade teacher and you have students that need, and then spell it out without any personally identifiable information, and it can make suggestions because it's going to pull information from it. But in EduAid that I mentioned, and in some of the other tools that are out there, they have the options for teachers, and that it's in a safe space where all of that information, data privacy, is all taken care of. And so you can change the Lexile level. So if you have a student who is in the 5th grade, but they're reading at the 3rd grade level, you would want to make an adjustment to that reading passage for them to meet their needs, and with vocabulary. And so in that EduAid that I mentioned, you tell it, like, this is the grade level, this is the language, whatever. And so it does it for you. And then they have even different categories. So if you're doing, behavioral intervention plans or anything like that, you just give it the prompt and the level, and it changes everything, again, within that safe space. And so it does save teachers a ton of time. And it's not just that, it functions very much like ChatGPT when you see it and you're like, whoa, that just saved me so much time. But I don't know what's happening with my information versus it's in this confined space in my account and I control it. So
you've also you talk a lot about the time saving for teachers in terms of grading. I think teachers are sometimes afraid to lose that control. And what would be your answer to that? If you said, I've set this up to grade, there are many applications out there that will do that for you, grade writing and things. What do you say to somebody who says, well, if I'm not reading it and I'm not doing the marking on the paper or the typing on the file, how do I know that it's reliable or in my voice or whatever?
You always, even if I'm using something where the kids are speaking and I'm using the AI generated feedback, I always go through and look because I still want to see. I just may not have as much time to go through it then for them to get the feedback right away. But I always go back and check it just to make sure that it's, spot on. I may not listen to the whole thing. If it's like a 4-minute response and I just I see what the AI feedback says. And if I see something that alerts me, then I'll go back and listen to the whole thing. And I always give them feedback, whether it's in that system or just one-on-one conversation.
Well, and we know that often our own feedback is minimal, right? Because I can't tell you how many times I've graded the same free response question in an AP human geography course and just, I have my little list of comments and I'm copying and pasting so that I can get them all done before I have to see the kids the next day. How does using some of these AI tools, do you think, make you a happier person so that you can continue doing your great work?
I I definitely think it helps, especially with like a lot of teachers feeling like there's so much that you have to do, like all those clerical tasks that can be automated, save time, just to get a quick check on students so that you're not sitting there grading when they're not going to look at the feedback. And I will say that getting a Spanish teacher is difficult because I did take a sabbatical a couple of years ago and we could not find one anywhere. Luckily, I found one on Facebook that her husband had moved to Pittsburgh to do his medical internship, and it took forever. But when it comes to using some of those tools, it's like I always think about what are the things that take up the most time for you that don't really necessarily need the like human in it as much, and yet still need the human component.
Parent letter to go out every week, right?
Yeah. And so if you can save time, like, and as an administrator, like, I guess embracing that and modeling that a little bit and say, hey, because my principal has done this, my superintendent has done this and said, hey, I heard about this tool that does this, instead of taking all the time to create this, use it as a starter. Or I have friends that, not in my school, but they have been teaching 5th grade for years. And 2 of them found out one was going to 3rd and one was going to 2nd. They found that out like a few days before the start of the school year, which I can't even imagine that I know the stress that they told me, but being able to say, okay, I need to get started with all of these things at this level that I've never taught. I need an assistant, and using that to just at least get you through like that initial week with ideas and activities. And then you can kind of like breathe and see how it can fill in. So lots of possibilities, but like I said before, responsibilities too.
What are your thoughts on the dangers or struggles in sometimes we assume that because kids are digital natives, they already know how to do this stuff. And some do, right? And so there is, especially when they come into your classroom, you may have kids who are coding already and doing all that. And then you may have kids who are barely using any technology at all. Because you're using this technology-rich environment, what do you do to sort of onboard your students early to make sure that you're not going over somebody's head or also teaching them things they already know how to do?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's an excellent point too, because they do have the phones. And in my STEAM course, I had them, one time I wanted them to send me an attachment and they had no idea how to do that. And some other things. And I'm like, okay, we're going to start with some basics and digital citizenship and all of that. But like, if I'm asking them to use or create something, then I will create something and I'll share that with them so they can see it. So like, I'll say hypothetically like a Nearpod lesson. And if I want them to create it, because I have older students, then I'll let them interact with it so they're familiar with the layout of it and then use that as a model.
One of the things you said in something I listened to, you talk a lot about project-based learning. I know that's very important to what you do, but you talk about this moment when you thought you were doing project-based learning and had been for a while, and then you learned that, what did you call it? Not project-based learning, but
learning based on projects.
Learning based on projects. Can you kind of differentiate those two for me and tell that story?
That was a great experience because you talk about the power of reflection and learning as you go. Like I wrote a blog article about project-based learning because I thought I was doing that. And then 5 years later, I went back and I can't believe I wrote that article because I wasn't doing that. I thought that projects were project-based learning. And I read the book Launch by A.J. Giuliani and John Spencer years ago. And I read a quote in there about if you assign a project and you get back 30 the same thing, it's not a project, it's a recipe. And I thought, I have been giving them recipes and I was taking points away for not fitting my format and whatever. So I told the students we're going to do project-based learning. I went to Buck Institute, now PBL Works, taught them about the elements, taught them about the why, and it was an unbelievable learning experience. I mean, for me, but also for them. And I had students that said, I stopped caring about grades for the first time. I've never had an experience learning like this. And I learned so much from them, and it's way more than I would have been able to teach them. So I laugh when you were starting to ask the question because there are so many things in my career in the last at least 10 years where I said, yep, thought I was doing that. Nope, wasn't doing that.
I mean, we can't, when we reflect, we should all reflect on our teaching practices, right? But sometimes it's hard because you're like, oh, I started a long time ago, right? So I used to show whole like movies in my class, right? I used to do that. I thought it was great and they must be getting so much out of it. And now the longer I've done this kind of stuff, I'm like, why, how much time did I lose in that? I guess my not quite my last question, but how important is it that we acknowledge when things are going well? So often when we work with this technology and things, we just focus on, oh, we had this glitch that we got derailed. How important that we notice when we're doing a good job and when our students are doing a good job.
You have to, and these are not my words, but it was a TED Talk. And she said, you always want to embrace like the near wins or the small wins and things and celebrate success, no matter how small. Because if you don't, you kind of lose sight of that and you might see like failures or things didn't work over and over and over. But if in the process you're like, and I do this in my class, I'm like, all right, the board came on or something little, and the kids just laugh at me. But you recognize it and acknowledging it for others, or sharing your story like, hey, you know what? I didn't know if this was going to work. I tried it. It went really great. And that just might be the answer that some other educator needs. Or when students see like, yeah, it's okay to fail, because even if you fail, sometimes then next time you're going to have a success. And it helps them and us to adjust, I think, even better.
We could talk forever.
We could.
It's almost lunchtime. And I don't want to keep the folks who are here to watch beyond that time, but I would just encourage everybody to find your work. I think you can find everything from Thrive in EDU. Is that right? Yes. Podcasts, many books. I look forward to seeing what hopefully your use of technology is making it possible to spread your brain even wider than it already does. So thank you so much for joining me here on ActiVATED Learning.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
And again, you can find us on all of the major platforms at ActiVATED Learning. Just search for it and you will find us. And please do follow and subscribe. For ActiVATED Learning, I'm Tom Landon.
ActiVATED Learning is produced by Blue Ridge PBS in partnership with the Virginia Department of Education
and in collaboration with VSTE, the Virginia Society for Technology and Education.
This podcast is hosted and produced by Tom Landon, Director of Educational Innovation,
with lots of help from graphic and audio designer Jay Prater.
Additional support provided by Andy Depew in our podcast studio.
Our Vice President of Education is Dr. Rose Martin.
Special thanks to Calypso Gilstrap, Associate Director of the Office of Educational Technology and Classroom Innovation
at the Virginia Department of Education.
Our credits are read by students at Westside and Highland Park Elementary Schools in Roanoke, Virginia. If you like what you hear, subscribe to ActiVATED Learning wherever you get your podcasts.
Or watch the Echo channel at blueridgepbs.org.